There are wounds that don't bleed, wounds that don't leave scars on the skin, but carve themselves into the soul. She doesn't remember the words, only the silence. He doesn't recall the slap, only the cold absence of love. What if the pain you carry today isn't even yours? What if the anxiety, the shame, the emptiness are echoes of something your family never dared to speak? Because behind every normal family dinner, behind every well-meant punishment, every smile that felt hollow, there might be something much darker, a silent inheritance of emotional trauma. And it lives on, not through stories told, but through behaviors repeated, invisible, insidious, generational. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unseen part of the self and of the family that lives on in secrets, shame, and unconscious repetition. And unless you face it, you'll become it. You'll pass it on, and you'll suffer forever. But here's the truth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. This video is not just about psychology. It's about breaking a spell. It's about waking up. Because if your family did any of this, you were programmed to suffer, but you don't have to keep suffering. Stay with this story, because what you're about to hear might explain everything. If something in you is already stirring, like a memory you can't name, like a truth you've always known deep down, then don't scroll away. Like, comment, subscribe. This may be the video that helps you reclaim your story. The invisible pain. What is silent family trauma? It begins with what wasn't said. Not the screams, not the slaps, but the subtle withdrawals, the quiet disapprovals, the cold room after a vulnerable moment. You don't need bruises to be wounded. Some of the deepest scars are formed in homes where everything looked fine, where birthdays were celebrated, meals were served, but your emotional world was never seen. Silent family trauma is the trauma that hides in plain sight. It's not always born from violence, but from absence, not from chaos, but from control. From families where feelings were forbidden, where love came with conditions, and where the child had to adapt, to survive a reality where being themselves was unsafe. It's the kind of trauma that doesn't come with a dramatic story, but instead with a lingering feeling. I was never enough. I had to earn love. I had to be perfect or disappear. This pain is invisible because it became normal. It became your baseline for relationships, for self-worth, for life itself. Carl Jung said that what we do not make conscious becomes fate. And this is where it begins, because the child learns without ever being told that love must be earned, that emotions are dangerous, that vulnerability is weakness, that their truth is too much for others to handle. They become masters of hiding their needs, masters of performance, of pleasing, of perfection. But inside, a quiet desperation grows, and that desperation follows them into adulthood, into friendships where they can't trust, into relationships where they feel unseen, into careers where no success ever feels like enough. This is how the ghost of the past becomes the architect of the future. Because until we recognize the invisible pain, we'll spend our lives trying to heal it in unconscious ways, through toxic love, through overachievement, through people-pleasing, or through emotional numbness. And the worst part, the world often praises the trauma mask, the strong one, the independent one, the one who always has it together. But beneath that mask is a child who never felt safe to fall apart. Recognizing silent trauma is not about blaming our families. It's about finally seeing what we were never allowed to feel. It's about creating the space to ask, what did I need that I never received? And what parts of me did I abandon just to belong? Only when we name the invisible pain can we begin to break free from it. The mask of the perfect family. They smiled in the family photos. The house was always clean. The neighbors admired them. Teachers praised the children. To the outside world, they were ideal, maybe even enviable. But behind closed doors, something felt off. Not always loud, not always obvious, but deeply unmistakably wrong. This is the mask of the perfect family, a mask built not from lies, but from survival, from generations of unspoken rules like, we don't talk about that, don't make a scene. What happens in this house stays in this house. Keep it together, or else. In many homes, the need to look good outweighs the need to be well. Image becomes more important than authenticity. Reputation is sacred, even if souls are quietly shattering behind it. In this environment, love becomes conditional, not spoken in words, but communicated through expectations. Be the good daughter, be the strong son, be the quiet one, be the high achiever. You weren't raised to express, you were raised to perform, and so the child learns to hide anything that could disrupt the illusion. Pain, swallow it. Anger, bury it. Sadness, smile through it. Questions, don't ask them. But the body remembers what the mouth was forced to forget. Underneath the surface of perfection lives the anxiety, the panic attacks, the unexplained rage, the depression that has no cause. These symptoms aren't dysfunction, they are information. Signals from a psyche that's been split in two, the you that plays the part, and the you that was never allowed to exist. Carl Jung warned that the greatest damage comes not from our darkness, but from our refusal to confront it. And families that demand perfection often demand denial. They don't mean to harm, but they inherit their own masks from generations before. Grandparents who lived through war, mothers who weren't allowed to cry, fathers who were told real men don't feel. The cycle repeats. The child becomes the adult who doesn't know how to feel safe unless they're performing, unless they're being useful, unless they're earning love. But real love has nothing to do with performance. Real love sees the mess. It holds space for fear. It allows pain. It welcomes truth. And the first place that love must be reclaimed is within. Taking off the family mask is terrifying, but wearing it forever is soul death. You didn't come here to play a role. You came here to remember who you were before the mask. If this is speaking to something you've always felt but never put into words, pause, like, comment, subscribe. Your healing begins with recognition, and this community exists to name what was once unnameable. The child who became the parent. They were only 7, but they already knew how to read a room. They could sense tension before words were spoken. They'd calm the storms. They'd carry the weight. They'd smile even when they wanted to scream. They were the child who became the parent. In psychology, this is called parentification. When a child is unconsciously forced to take on the emotional or physical responsibilities of an adult. Sometimes it's overt. The child cooks dinner, raises siblings, takes care of bills, or mediates adult conflicts. But more often, it's invisible. They become the emotional anchor for a wounded parent. They hold space for pain they can't name. They comfort the very person who was supposed to protect them. And here's the tragedy. The parent doesn't always mean to do this. But when they are overwhelmed, traumatized, emotionally immature, the child becomes the container for the adult's chaos. This child learns early that their value comes from being strong, from being the one who holds everything together, from anticipating everyone else's needs and ignoring their own, and the cost. They never get to feel safe. They never get to be vulnerable. They never learn that they are allowed to fall apart. Carl Jung said that one of the most tragic fates is to live someone else's unlived life, and that's exactly what happens here. The child becomes a vessel for their parents' unprocessed trauma. They lose themselves in the process of trying to save the ones they love. But a child cannot be a parent. A child cannot be a therapist. A child cannot hold the pain of a grown-up world without fracturing inside. And so, they split. They become highly capable on the outside, successful, responsible, empathetic. Everyone admires them, but inside they are exhausted. They feel guilty when they rest. They don't know how to ask for help. They struggle with boundaries because they were never allowed to have any. They become the friend who always listens, but never speaks. The partner who gives everything and receives little. The employee who burns out, but won't say no. All because, deep down, a part of them still believes, if I stop holding it all together, everything will fall apart. But here's the truth they were never told. It was never their job to hold it together. Their only job was to be a child. Healing from parentification means grieving the childhood that was stolen. It means learning to receive, not just give. To say no without guilt, to rest without shame, to feel without fixing. It means giving that little one, still hidden inside, the parenting they never received. And perhaps for the first time, letting someone else hold them. The weight of secrets, invisible loyalties and generational silence. In every family, there are things that are never said, names that are never mentioned, stories that trail off into silence, rooms that feel heavy for no reason. And yet, the child feels it. They sense the sorrow behind the smiles, the rage beneath the routine, the tension in the pauses between words. This is not imagination, it's inheritance. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a psychic field where unspoken truths live on generation after generation, as if trauma had a memory of its own. These are the invisible loyalties, unconscious contracts passed down from mother to daughter, from father to son, not in words, but in behaviors, in emotions, in pain. A grandfather abandoned the family. Now the grandson fears commitment. A mother was never allowed to speak. Now her daughter feels guilty every time she tells the truth. A father carried shame from a war. Now his child carries anxiety without understanding why. The family never talks about it, but the body remembers. The nervous system remembers. The child lives out what was buried. These invisible loyalties are acts of unconscious love. The child says, without saying, if you couldn't cry, I won't cry either. If you carried shame, I will carry it for you. If you suffered, I won't allow myself to be happier than you. It's a form of soul bonding, but it comes at a cost. The cost is the child's own life. They become trapped in patterns that don't belong to them, depression that has no cause, self-sabotage that makes no sense, an inner heaviness that can't be explained. And when they try to change, they feel guilt. Why? Because to heal feels like betrayal. To speak the truth feels like disloyalty. To grow beyond the family story feels like abandonment. This is the prison of the unconscious contract. But healing begins with breaking silence, not to expose, not to blame, but to see, to witness what no one before you had the strength or safety to witness, to say, this didn't start with me, but it can end with me. It takes courage to name the family shadow, to ask the forbidden questions, to feel what was unfelt, to grieve what was never mourned. But when you do, you don't just free yourself, you free them too. The ancestors, the ones who couldn't speak, the ones who survived by staying silent. You become the voice they never had. And the future no longer has to carry the same weight, the complex of the wounded mother or absent father. Every child is born needing two things, nourishment and safety, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. But what happens when the ones who were meant to protect, nurture, and guide are themselves broken, absent, or wounded? What happens when the mother is there, but emotionally unavailable? When her love is conditional, anxious, engulfing, or cold? What happens when the father is present, but emotionally absent, or entirely gone? This is how parental complexes form, unconscious patterns of emotion, belief, and behavior built around the figures of mother and father. Carl Jung believed that the mother and father are not just personal, they are archetypal. They shape how we relate to the world, how we relate to others, and how we relate to ourselves. The wounded mother complex. The mother is meant to be the first source of unconditional love, but what if she's overwhelmed, emotionally immature, narcissistic, depressed? The child might internalize messages like, "I have to take care of her emotions. If I express my needs, I'll be punished or ignored. Love means losing myself. I must shrink to be loved." As an adult, they may become the overgiver in relationships, the one who feels guilty for having needs, the one who fears rejection yet craves intimacy, the one who mistrusts softness because it always came with a cost, the absent or emotionally distant father. The father archetype represents protection, structure, and direction. But what if he's distant, emotionally unavailable, abusive, or simply gone? The child might learn, "I'm not worth staying for. No one will protect me. I'm on my own." Masculine energy is unsafe. I have to become the strong one. This can manifest in adulthood as fear of commitment, inability to trust authority or feel grounded, over-reliance on logic and disconnection from emotion, deep-rooted self-doubt and lack of inner structure, complex character flaw. These are not personality traits. They are survival adaptations, emotional strategies developed by a child who had to find a way to exist in an unsafe or emotionally barren environment. And they are powerful, because the wounded inner child keeps showing up in adult situations, in romantic relationships, in friendships, in the workplace, even in spiritual practice. They whisper old truths. "You're too much. You're not enough. Don't trust them. Don't trust yourself." Until we recognize these patterns, we become trapped in a cycle of recreation, choosing partners who mirror the same wounds, running from or chasing the same pain, searching for the parent we never had in every face we meet. But here's the truth Jung knew. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. And healing begins when we see the parent not as God, but as a human being, wounded, limited, incomplete. We grieve the ideal, we release the fantasy, we meet the reality, and in that grief, we find freedom, because once we stop waiting for a different childhood, we can begin building a new inner home, one where the inner child is no longer afraid, no longer alone, no longer unseen. The adult, who doesn't know why they're suffering, they have a job, they have a partner, they smile in photos, they function, they should be happy, and yet something feels wrong. There's a weight in their chest that never fully lifts, a quiet panic behind their eyes, a feeling that life is happening to them, and they're always one step behind it. They struggle with boundaries but don't know why. They sabotage relationships, then cry themselves to sleep. They overthink every word they say. They feel too much, or nothing at all. This is the adult who doesn't know why they're suffering, and behind their suffering, there is often a silent, exiled child, one who never got to feel safe, seen, or loved unconditionally. The adult tries everything: therapy, self-help books, meditation apps, productivity hacks, even spiritual bypassing, telling themselves to just let it go. But the pain doesn't leave, because the pain doesn't live in the mind. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the soul. Trauma isn't just what happened, it's what never got processed. Many of these adults weren't abused. They were emotionally neglected. They didn't grow up in chaos. They grew up in emptiness. No one ever asked how they felt. No one ever validated their emotions. No one ever said, "You're allowed to be exactly who you are." So they adapted. They became the good one, the quiet one, the strong one, the achiever, the helper. And now, as adults, they don't know who they are when they stop performing, because they were never taught to be, only to do. Carl Jung wrote that neurosis is often the suffering of a soul that has not discovered its meaning. But meaning cannot emerge when a person is still living in survival mode. And make no mistake, many adults are, smiling through panic attacks, succeeding while slowly collapsing inside, disconnected from their inner world because it was never safe to enter it. The inner child still waits beneath the suffering adult is the child who was never allowed to cry, learned that being vulnerable was dangerous, took care of everyone but was never cared for, equated love with sacrifice. That child didn't disappear. They just went underground. They wait in your triggers, your patterns, your pain, not to punish you, but to be seen. Healing isn't a fix, it's a reunion. You cannot think your way out of emotional trauma. You must feel your way through it. Not alone, but with presence, compassion, and care. It begins with asking, what emotion have I been avoiding? What need did I never have met? Whose pain am I still carrying? What part of me did I abandon just to belong? The suffering is not weakness. It's a message, a portal, a call to return to the parts of you that were left behind and offer them what no one else ever did: safety, attention, unconditional love. If this feels like your story, even in fragments, you are not alone. Subscribe, comment, share your truth. You're not broken, you're remembering. Repressed rage and toxic love. When emotions become illness, children are not born ashamed of their feelings. They cry when they're hungry. They scream when they're angry. They reach out when they need love. But in many homes, those natural impulses were met with silence, punishment, or ridicule. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Don't talk back. You're too sensitive. Good children don't get angry. So, the child learns to repress, to hide their tears, to swallow their rage, to disconnect from their needs. On the outside, they become obedient. Inside, they begin to fracture. The exiled emotion, anger, sadness, fear, these are not enemies. They are signals. They tell us when a boundary has been crossed, when something is missing, when we need protection or care. But when a child learns that expressing emotion leads to rejection, those emotions go underground. They don't disappear, they fester, they turn inward. The result? Anxiety that has no clear cause, depression that feels like a void, chronic tension in the body, autoimmune disorders, stomach problems, migraines. The body becomes the stage where unspoken feelings act themselves out. Repressed rage, repeated in love. One of the most painful patterns appears in adult relationships. The person who was never allowed to express rage often attracts partners who trigger it. Not consciously, but through unconscious repetition. They fall in love with someone emotionally unavailable, someone who abandons them, someone who mirrors the parent wound. And when the old wound is touched, the buried rage erupts. Explosive fights, jealousy, control, or the opposite, submission, silence, freezing. This is not bad luck in love. It's the psyche's attempt to resolve the past by replaying it in the present. But repetition is not resolution. It's a trap. Jung and the shadow of emotion. Carl Jung called the unexpressed parts of ourselves the shadow. And he warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When we deny our rage, it doesn't disappear. It lives in our shadow. It chooses our partners. It shapes our illnesses. It leaks out in sarcasm, passive aggression, or self-destruction. The path of healing. Healing doesn't mean becoming calm all the time. It means reclaiming the exiled emotions as allies, to feel rage as a boundary signal, not as shame, to cry without apology, to admit I am hurt without fear of being abandoned, to learn that emotions are not weakness, they are truth. When repressed rage is honored, when grief is allowed to flow, when fear is met with compassion, the body begins to soften. Relationships shift. Love becomes safer, not toxic, not violent, not conditional, because love cannot be true if it is built on denial. Real love holds all parts of us, even the ones we were taught to hide. The journey of the wounded hero, the call to break the cycle. Every great story begins with a wound, a child abandoned, a kingdom in decay, a shadow threatening the land. Fairy tales, myths, legends, they all echo the same truth. Suffering is not random. It is the initiation of the hero's journey, and what is true in myth is true in the soul. The wounds we inherit from our families, the silence, the neglect, the absence, the rage, are not just tragedies. They are invitations, invitations to awaken, to step out of unconscious repetition, to become the one who breaks the cycle. The descent into the underworld. Jung believed that true transformation requires a descent, not away from the pain, but into it. The hero must leave the ordinary world of denial, cross the threshold, and face the dragons of the unconscious. The shame no one spoke of, the rage that was never expressed, the grief buried for generations. This descent is terrifying because it means questioning the family myths. It means facing the possibility that the people we loved most also wounded us most. But it is here, in the underworld of the soul, that true power is found. The archetype of the wounded healer. Jung spoke of the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who does not heal despite the wound, but through it. Your suffering becomes your compass. Your pain becomes your teacher. The very thing that broke you becomes the key to your rebirth. This is why those who endured the deepest family wounds often become the most compassionate, the most wise, the most transformative souls, because they have been to the depths and returned with gifts. Breaking the cycle is heroism. When you set boundaries your parents never could, you are breaking the cycle. When you learn to feel emotions your family buried, you are breaking the cycle. When you choose partners not out of trauma, but out of love, you are breaking the cycle. This is not betrayal of your family. It is the deepest form of loyalty, not to their wounds, but to their unlived hopes. Because perhaps what your ancestors always wanted, but never had the courage to claim, was the freedom you are now seeking. The call to you. The journey of the wounded hero begins with a whisper. It doesn't have to be this way. The whisper becomes a calling. The pain stops with you. And finally, it becomes a vow. I will not pass this wound forward. This is not an easy path. It is not glamorous. It requires grief, courage, and sacrifice. But it is the only path that leads to freedom, and it is the path your soul came here to walk. Confront or cut. The difficult choice of psychological maturity. There comes a moment on the path of healing that no one prepares us for, a moment more painful than the wound itself, the moment when we must decide, do I confront my family or do I walk away? The fantasy of reconciliation. Every child carries a secret hope that one day their parents will finally see them. That one day the apology will come, that one day the love they longed for will be given freely. This hope lingers into adulthood, even after years of neglect, even after cycles of abuse, even after silence has turned into walls. But sometimes, that day never comes, because some parents cannot change, some siblings cannot face the truth. Some families cling to their illusions more tightly than to love, and the child, now grown, is faced with an unbearable truth. Healing may never come from them. It must come from within. The courage to confront. For some, the path is confrontation, speaking the unspoken, naming the pain, setting boundaries. This can be an act of liberation, a declaration that says, I will no longer carry your silence. I will no longer pretend this didn't happen. I will no longer betray myself to protect the family myth. But confrontation comes with risk. Not every family can tolerate truth. Some will deny, gaslight, or punish the one who dares to speak. The black sheep is often not the problem, but the one who refuses to keep the problem hidden. The pain of cutting ties. For others, the only path left is distance, reducing contact, or sometimes no contact at all. This decision is brutal because it feels like betrayal. It triggers guilt, shame, and fear. Society calls family sacred. Religions demand honor and loyalty. But what if honoring your family means destroying yourself? What if staying loyal means abandoning your own soul? Psychological maturity means facing this impossible paradox, loving your family and still walking away. The taboo of choosing yourself. Choosing distance is not an act of hate. It is an act of survival, of self-love, of refusing to pass the wound forward. Because when a family cannot see you, protect you, or respect you, your responsibility is not to keep the illusion alive. Your responsibility is to your inner child, to your future, to the generations that come after you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop playing a role in a story that was never yours. The maturity of boundaries. Psychological adulthood is not just paying bills or having children. It is the ability to decide who has access to your life, how much of your truth you share, which patterns you will allow and which you will end. And these decisions are not easy. They will break your heart, but they will also free your soul. Because the truth is this: family is not defined by blood. It is defined by love, safety, and respect. And sometimes you must leave the family you were born into to create the family your soul always needed. Healing begins in you, the process of individuation. There is a moment in every healing journey when the gaze turns inward. After all the anger, the grief, the blame, the searching, the realization dawns. The family may never change, the past cannot be undone, but the future can be rewritten. And it begins not with them, but with you. Individuation, becoming who you truly are. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. It is not about perfection. It is not about erasing pain. It is about integrating what was split, the child who was silenced, the rage that was buried, the love that was withheld, the truth that was denied. Individuation means bringing all of these parts home, not rejecting them, not shaming them, but recognizing this too is me, and I am still worthy of love. The inner parent healing begins when you stop waiting for the parent you never had, when you become the one who offers safety, kindness, and protection to yourself. This is not an act of pride, it is an act of mercy. The adult self becomes the guardian of the inner child, the one who says, "You're allowed to feel. You don't have to earn love anymore. You are safe with me." And little by little, the nervous system begins to soften. The body begins to release. The soul begins to trust again, breaking the spell. The curse of generational trauma is that it repeats until someone sees it, until someone feels it, until someone chooses differently. That someone is you. By daring to name the pain, by setting boundaries, by reclaiming your emotions, by offering yourself the love you were denied, you become the cycle breaker, not just for yourself, but for the ones who came before and the ones who will come after. The mystery of wholeness, individuation, is not a straight path. It is not a finish line. It is a spiral, a lifelong dance of remembering, forgetting, and remembering again. But every step forward creates more space for life to flow freely, more space for love to be real, for relationships to be honest, for the soul to breathe. You stop living as the echo of your family's wounds, and you begin living as the voice of your own truth. This is the great paradox of healing. The wound remains part of your story, but it no longer defines your destiny. Instead of suffering forever, you learn to transform suffering into wisdom, pain into compassion, shadow into light. You are not alone, and the choice is yours. There are two kinds of inheritance, the one written in wills and documents, and the one written in silence, in wounds, in the unspoken. If your family did these things, you know now that you carry more than memories. You carry the echoes of generations, invisible chains that shaped your thoughts, your relationships, your very sense of self. But chains can be broken. A journey recapped. We began with the invisible trauma, the pain hidden behind the mask of the perfect family. We saw how children are forced into roles they never chose, caretakers, performers, peacekeepers. We explored the weight of family secrets, the shadow of wounded mothers and absent fathers, the suffering of adults who don't know why they're suffering. We named the rage, the grief, the silence, and we followed the path of the wounded hero who must decide, confront or cut. And finally, we arrived here, at Individuation. The sacred work of becoming who you truly are, the power of choice. You cannot rewrite the past, you cannot change your family, but you can change how the story continues through you. You can choose to feel what they could not feel, to speak what they could not speak, to love yourself in the ways they never learned to love you. This is not betrayal, it is liberation. And it is the deepest act of love for yourself, your ancestors, and those who will come after you. The final invitation. If something inside you stirred during this journey, if a memory surfaced, if a truth finally clicked, if you felt seen in a way you never have before, don't let it end here. Take a breath. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Choose one act of self-love today. Even if it's as simple as saying, I am allowed to exist as I am. And remember, you are not broken, you are not alone, you are becoming whole. If this video touched you, subscribe now. Share your story in the comments, because your words may give someone else the courage to heal. And send this to the person you know still suffers in silence. The cycle ends with you, and the healing begins now.